I mean, I like that. I'm not sure as you know how similar it is to surprise minimization and all that, but I really like this notion of uh sense making as the function as the primary goal of it. And I've been thinking about this recently in the context of memory, and the idea that what you get in these engrams is an incredibly compressed, very sparse representation of things that happened before. And at any given time, since you don't have access to all of that, what you have access to is just the engram, the process of sort of re-expanding it back out is very creative. It isn't, you don't have a real allegiance to what did this mean before. All you have is, well, what do I do with this now, right? What sense can I make of this now? And this, like, ongoing dynamic property of a process of trying to understand what your own memories mean. And I almost feel like Mark Solms has this phrase about consciousness being palpated uncertainty about the environment. And I feel like maybe it's more palpated uncertainty about your own memories. It's this constant process of, here you are now with whatever traces the past has left in your brain and body, and you're constantly trying to make a coherent story out of this. It's and a lot of it, I think, has to be creative. You have to bring stuff to it that is not in the engram itself, because you've, of course, compressed it. You've thrown away all the, correlations and everything else. And so a lot of it, I think, is that confabulatory kind of process where it doesn't matter what it used to mean. What matters is what can I do with it now, and we have in biology, we have examples of this, like the fact that the butterfly retains memories of the caterpillar, right? Even though the brain is refactored during metamorphosis and all that. But to me, the most interesting part of that is that the actual memories of the caterpillar are of no use to the butterfly whatsoever. You can't use the exact memories, but what you can do is remap some of that information onto a completely new body, new preferences, food preferences, new motion control. Now you live in a 3D world. You're a hard-bodied creature now instead of a crawler in 2D. You can't use the memories directly, but you can reinterpret them in ways that make sense to you now, and do things with them now. So I like that emphasis on this, the kind of the active construction aspect of it.
Mm-hmm. Mike, I think we could tell exactly the same story you've told here about percepts from the external world, as opposed to memories, which we kind of tend to think of as percepts from the internal world. Although lots of them are actually written on the external world as some sort of stigmergic record, as we've discussed a lot. But take it down to the cellular level, some receptor becomes activated and kicks off some pathway. It doesn't actually matter to the cell what the previous event that kicked off that receptor was. What matters to the cell is, what do I have to do now, given what I just sensed? And that sensation or percept, if you want to put it in some sort of conceptual terms, can be external or internal. It doesn't really matter. It's still information that has to be coped with in the present somehow or other. And this is why I think that Carl's emphasis on appropriate action is a nice way to think about coherence. I mean, we've sort of adopted previously in papers Bateson's notion of differences that make a difference. And what do they make a difference for? Well, they make a difference for doing something. And coping in real time with whatever information is coming in. And from that point of view, the question of, I have this information, what do I do? What do I do next? is a prediction problem. And the question is, you make a prediction, you do something, right? You act on the environment in some way or other. And the result of that action is either good for you or bad for you. So maybe you cease to exist, or maybe some food appears, or maybe something very threatening appears. Who knows? So in that sense, this is a very simple sense, of course, of testing predictions, right? You're just acting and seeing what happens. But there was some model that drove the selection of that action. I think that's really all that Carl's talking about. You can make it sound very cognitive, but you don't have to.
The big insight of the transformer is that, in my view, that the serialization of only adjacent events has limitations. When you want to model the structure of text, you cannot use the same as for images. For images, you can use convolutional networks because they basically embody this bias that adjacent pixels are semantically related, which works relatively well in the visual world. But for text, this doesn't work because you are going to miss all the long-range connections in the text if you look at n-grams. It's very difficult because the alphabet is too large to basically make an n-gram model that is bridging over large distance in the text. So now you basically need to find structure that is free-form, so to speak, that is deserializing the text into a scene and operate on that scene. And you need to have a process that is actively constructing your working memory contents, not as a sequence of events where you decide what to do next, but where you're modeling the entire future space of possibilities at once and then sort that space somehow.
It seems, just a funny thing, Sam Gershman wrote a couple of days ago, you're about the computer code and kind of keeping it up to date and everything. And he said, your most important collaborator is you 6 months ago, and he's not answering emails. And I thought that was pretty funny, in terms of the messages, in interpreting messages and where they come from. But I think Chris, to your point a minute ago, when this event happens, I think maybe one important piece of metadata you might want is whether that event was caused by you, whatever that is, or by something else, right? Because wouldn't you want to know if something is like, am I being hacked? Am I learning, or am I being trained? If there's a particular event, biologically anyway, it would seem like there's some value to understand, did I just do that, or was this somehow triggered from the outside? It seems like there would be evolutionary pressure to have ways of figuring that out. No?
Mm-hmm. Well, we certainly have very complicated machinery that tries to answer that question. That this whole kind of cognitive ownership and the emotions associated with cognitive ownership and all of that stuff that goes wrong in particular ways and particular unfortunate people. And yeah, getting that sort of thing systematically wrong is debilitating. But it's all essentially heuristic, right? It's a heuristic solution to an undecidable problem. It's like our frame problem, heuristics. So, yeah, I think that sort of heuristic metaprocessing is extremely important. Let me remark also for a moment on language. When we're thinking about language and parsing and non-local relations and all of that, I think one thing we have to think about in terms of chunking input into bigger pieces that are then analyzed as units is that's a time windowing kind of process where we allow some input to come in. We say, okay, You mentioned working memory capacity. I mean, now we're going to put this in working memory and we're going to do a bunch of stuff to it. And then we're going to allow the frame to advance and do a bunch of stuff to the next chunk and compare those two results for consistency, et cetera. So we are working at this larger delta t. But I think at that larger delta t, we're still answering a what do I do next question. You know, what do I do with this sentence? What do I do with this paragraph? How can I put this in a representation that I feel like I understand? And feeling like I understand it means feeling like there's something I can do with it. There's some inference I can make from it, for example. So it's a very good point that you make about the difference between language and images. But I think it's mainly a scaling as well. It's like the geometry point you made earlier. You know, we're constantly imposing these sorts of geometries on information that we encounter. And the geometry may or may not be there. We always treat it as there, right? We say, oh, that geometry is in the external world, but it's really us that's putting that geometry onto the input.
Mm-hmm. I think a lot of our actions only make sense when we recognize that we are not just deciding what to do now, like a thermostat does, like a control system in the present does, but agency is the control of future states. And what I observe in humans, that they seem to be temporally more coherent than, for instance, the present AI video models, which have more real-time coherence in the sense that they're coherent in space, that when you generate a picture, all the features in the picture seem to be more coherent within each other than the picture is coherent in 2 seconds into the future. So basically, information preservation across time is something that's difficult to discover for the present models. And humans are much, much better at this, recognizing that the volume that you're looking at needs to remain constant over very many frames into the future, for instance, for the spatial cohesion of the objects that we're looking at. And it probably means that we have to build a model that is more compressed than the ones that the LLMs and the foundation models are currently building.
Yeah, no, I can certainly see that. I mean, in a sense, you're making Mike's point about memory, except in the other direction. Right? We have this notion of not only a past notion of, but a future expectation about the preservation of identity. But what counts as identity gets fuzzier and fuzzier as the planning horizon increases. So if I'm planning my future, I could think, okay, well, I'm still going to exist a year from now, maybe, but who knows what I'll be like, right? I don't have details about that in the same way that I don't have details about last year. So I think this business of coarse graining is very important when we think about temporal coherence.
Yeah. I think that identity is ultimately always instrumental to graded assignment. And if we remove that, then identity is going to dissolve. It's not going to form in the first place. So basically, if you don't have a reason to discover yourself as something that is idiosyncratic, for instance, behaving specifically based on your protocol memory, and then it makes very little sense to assign an identity to yourself, making a self model.